All right. So, another exciting episode of Deconstructing Data. So, welcome to the Deconstructing Data podcast. I'm Josh Morgan, filling in for Jesse this week, along with David Finkelstein, BDEX's wonderful founder and CEO. David, how's it going?
It's going well, Josh. Good to have you back on the show. It's been a while.
It absolutely has. And David, we are lucky to be welcome another esteemed guest. Please welcome Cory Munchbach, CEO of BlueConic. Cory, let me make sure. Did I butcher that name or did I get it right?
You nailed it. I'm impressed. Very good.
Thank you. Well, welcome to the show, Cory.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we're glad to have you here, Cory. So we're going to have you kick it off for us. Would love to give our listeners a chance to learn a little bit about you. So if you can give a little background, your history, and what led you to BlueConic, and then give us a little intro to BlueConic.
Yeah, you bet. So I am, as you said, the CEO, but I have only been in that seat a little over 6 months now. But I've been with the company almost 9 years. So I joined back in January of 2015. I was employee 17, and we're just over 10x bigger than that now. So I've been part of this journey in lots of different phases and chapters over that time period. Prior to joining BlueConic, I had been an analyst at Forrester Research, where I covered various marketing and strategy trends with the CMO practice, as well as marketing technology as part of the customer insights practice. And I wrote the first wave on the marketing clouds when I was there. So marketing tech has been sort of where I've been most steeped over the last almost 15 years or so now. And that's perfectly fitting given BlueConic is a marketing technology, specifically a customer data platform or a CDP. And our focus is helping large brands, particularly in the B2C space, unify and activate data for the business. So whether you're a marketer, a customer experience professional, digital experience, sort of all of those folks whose responsibilities are to figure out how to grow the business through better customer experiences and brand interactions. We're the platform that gives you the data to do that and activate on it and engage with your customers in the best possible way.
That's awesome. What a great journey. Love to hear a journey like that. Coming in early with the company and then making your way up to CEO. That's fantastic. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. It's been a journey. That's the right description for it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I get it. I understand that sort of journey of, a company's growth. There's ups and downs, and it doesn't really matter what happens in between. It just matters where you end up, right?
Totally. There's this amazing book actually by Scott Belsky, who is now at Adobe. His company was acquired by them, but it's called The Messy Middle. And I remember reading it a couple of years ago when it first came out. And it's just very 1 to 2 page chapters, sort of snippets that he pulled together from his notes and thoughts over the many years of running Behance, which is the company that Adobe acquired. But you read it and it's exactly like that. Is right. Everyone wants to see sort of just the up and to the right. And it's really these, maximizing when you're at the top and trying to get out of the bottom and doing that over and over again to try to get up there. And that is so far still the best book I've seen on creating and being an entrepreneur and building a company is that book, The Messy Middle.
That's cool. I hadn't heard of that book, and I've read a lot of business books, but I'm going to have to check that one out. Sounds really
cool.
But having lived it, I totally get it, and been there, done that, and so I totally understand. That's the typical journey for a company, and most people don't see that. Most people just see it kind of looks like it goes up, right? And
totally
bigger and bigger, but there's so many ups and downs in the middle of that. So that's a great reference. Let's talk a little bit more about CDPs, and let's talk about identity first. I think that was our sort of first topic we were going to talk about. Identity resolution has gotten, let's deconstruct this because it's changed a lot over the last couple of years. And, we talk a lot about identity because BDEX is heavily invested in the identity space. We talk a lot on our side about sort of the problems that exist with identity, especially because of the last couple of years. But there's problems that happen because of, just ad fraud creates bad data associated to identity. Now we also have sort of the limitations in tracking, right, through iOS and through cookies, which is attributing to that. And so I'd love to get your take and what your experience has been running a CDP and sort of those trials with identity over the past few years and where you see it going.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think it's much like anything in this space. Part of what makes it hard is that there isn't necessarily one established and universally used definition for what identity actually means in marketing and advertising, in data. And there's so many kind of synonyms for it that make sense to some companies, right? They may call it the golden record, and that's, for them, that is identity. For others, it may be anonymous IDs that are part of their identity graph, which is obviously totally different. Or maybe I shouldn't say obviously, but it's the range of proxies that identity can be used and sort of interchanged with that I think makes this space really, really challenging often to kind of navigate. And then you couple, as you say, a lot of change that has happened in the category writ large, which has just added, again, a whole other level of challenge to navigate. And so I think, for me, this whole idea of sort of identity resolution really is more of a continuum. I think this idea of trying to get to one standard definition wouldn't even necessarily serve us or serve marketers or serve the industry. Because I think there's just different levels of identity and different levels of confidence that you need to have in knowing who it is that you're addressing as a brand. That varies based on the channel, based on the type of interaction, based on the type of company you are. I think, right, we can see with the history of DMPs, for example, being a few degrees removed from precisely who a person is it a bad thing when we're talking about ad targeting? It's still a huge improvement potentially over the way we were doing things before. Now, DMPs have essentially gone the way of the dodo, or about to, with all the changes in third-party data that we'll talk about. So it's this constant sort of evolution of really, to what extent do I need to know who you are? To what extent do I need to be able to address you? And with what type of information? And I think it's more productive to think about it on that spectrum, quite frankly, than to try to get to a place where one system or one team or anything like that kind of owns the concept of identity. It can and should vary, and it sets the company up, I think, for more respectful, kind of purpose-based, to use some GDPR language, interactions based on who we think you are. And that's uncomfortable maybe sometimes because of the variation there, but I think is a more accurate representation of the kind of world we need to get to, and creating some of that framework. Still work in progress, lots of change happening, but that's where I'd like to see us moving toward, is a better continuum, better concept of how this works across different types of systems, and what it means for engagement and the customer, most importantly, ahead and above sort of what makes sense within a given technology or a tech stack in particular.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting situation. I just today I received an email from a credit card company that I'll leave nameless, simply because they happen to be a client of ours, and just recently started to, we actually haven't done any work for them yet, but we just recently got approval across the company to provide some data to help them improve their targeting. But I got an email today with a credit card offer. And it came to an email that I haven't used in probably 8 or 9 years, but I still have it. It's kind of like from it's a hobby website that I have. And then it was addressed to my wife. And so this is sort of like the, identity problem here, where it's like, where did this data come from? Like, how did they have my wife's name associated to this email that I used 9 years ago? It's like, something broke. Something's really broken. And it was so timely because I sent it to our sales guy, and I was like, here, show them this and let them know, that whatever they're using, whoever they're using today to identify who they're targeting is not working.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also a good example of why we have such kind of a broken ecosystem also on the sort of buyer side, if you will, right? Sort of the marketers thinking about this stuff is, what is the risk associated with being wrong? And is it even worth investing in some of the level of personalization that they aspire to, given how inaccurate that can be? And obviously, as a sort of more sophisticated consumer of that, you know that something is broken. Maybe someone who is less aware of how these things work, or oftentimes don't work, might just say, oh, something happened on the back end, and they sort of breeze by it. But it can be really damaging. There's actually my former colleague from Forrester, Fatima Catablu, who's covered direct marketing and privacy for many, many years, shared a story back when we were both analysts about getting an email from a flower company that was from her former husband or former partner, addressed to his new wife. Like, it was just this totally jacked up situation that was deeply offensive and deeply problematic in that context, in an effort to supposedly, do what the consumer wants and bring hyper personalized experiences. And so I think it can go wrong in very, very real ways. But it's also like, what would the benefit of that be? And this is what I talk about when I'm thinking about the framework: is what are the thresholds that we need to work against? What is the incremental value of getting this right? But simultaneously, what's the incremental detriment if you get it wrong? And are those things in alignment with each other? And have we thought about it from both perspectives? I think one of the forcing mechanisms of some of the privacy regulations is at least requiring ostensibly more thought on this front. But then you also have to consider the implications of it. Is a lot of what we know and sort of have an understanding about of identity are based on data purchases that a company may have made years ago that have sort of wended through the system. The lineage of that data is not clear. So this can be a very significant mess to clear out, in addition to this idea of kind of creating a framework that's better for going forward. So it's both sides of this historical baggage and getting yourself set up to do better in the future. And I think we're really in the early days of figuring out how to do that well, for most marketers for a lot of reasons.
So yeah. So aside obviously from having just bad data, incomplete data, where are on strategies, where are we seeing the biggest mistakes happening when we're talking about identity resolution?
So I think there's a couple of things, Josh. It's a great question. So one is, I think, overdoing it, sort of the example of, right, like we've over tweaked the algorithm where we've got sort of these probabilistic approaches. So I think most of the listeners probably know what that means, right? But it's a degree of confidence that this email is also the same person. So we're going to merge these identities together because we feel pretty confident that Cory J. Munch at Gmail is also Cory at munchbach.com, right? Like, so we can sort of merge those things together. We can feel pretty good about that. That is just dicey science, right? Like that presumes a level of data quality that most companies, I would suggest, do not typically have, particularly if you weren't born into the age of digital, where those emails are coming directly from a consumer account versus from an email list pull that you bought from an Experian or from wherever else. So especially if you've got that wonkiness in your data, probabilistic matching and merging can be very, very risky and result in some probably situations like we just described. So that's a big area, rooted again in the data quality, which I think most things, if you talk long enough, are going to come back to that question of data quality for sure. I think the other side of it, though, outside of the probabilistic matching, is just the disparate system. So even if you do have excellent merging and matching rules in place, it's highly confident based on, exact matches or things of that nature. Marketers in particular are dealing in a lot of different systems. One of the things that CDP exists to solve is kind of creating one view of the customer with all of the different identities, quote unquote, the proxies for them, the names, the email addresses, the account numbers, whatever it might be, in one place so that marketers actually kind of understand who that is across the different systems. But that still presumes that you have invested in that technology, that your data hygiene and data quality have been up-leveled through that process, and that your systems are all kind of talking to each other at a level that is usually very elusive for most marketing organizations. So I think those are the two biggest, is major issues with probabilistic matching and merging as a methodology on the one hand, on the disparate systems and how they talk to each other on the other, both kind of rooted in a data quality, data hygiene problem.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think that going back to what you said about over personalization, that's something that we've talked about here on the show before. If you're going to personalize messages to your existing customer base, that's awesome. That's first party data. You receive that directly from the consumer, so you can rely on that data. I think that in pretty much every other situation, you probably don't need to over personalize. You're better off in most cases. Like if I had received that email about this credit card offer and there was no name on it, I probably would have taken it a lot more serious than the fact that name. So you're basically allowing yourself to make some errors, and you can still benefit from them even in those error situations. So I think that's another good point too. And I think the over personalization is something that people need to be really careful about doing, unless they're dealing with first party data.
For sure. And an additional point, on that is, really taking the time to pull samples aside and do testing with them, right? Before you go ahead and run an algorithm across an entire data set or anything of that nature, right? Testing that out, seeing what your error rate is, that's a laborious effort, but maybe worth it if you're going to go kind of full on into it. And that gets into sort of the broader discussion of like, is this really juice worth the squeeze here? For some companies, great, sure. Kind of depends on where you're starting. For others, the answer may be no, and it may not be worth it, and the toll is too high. But that is where, to the point of every company sort of being a little bit different, those are the kind of questions and investigation that each company needs to do, rather than being able to say kind of declaratively, like, this is the only way or the best way to go about doing some of this.
And I think all of this ties really into our next topic on third-party data, because the reality is, third-party data, we've been telling people for years that third-party data is errant, by nature. And a lot of times, that was okay. A lot of times you're just using that data to build an audience to target in media. And so it was pretty much accepted that if you're advertised to 1 million people, even if they're, and in many cases, this was the case, even if only 10% of those were really the target you were trying to reach, you're reaching effective return on your ad spend, then it worked, right? But it's gotten worse and worse. And now with the limitation of tracking and things like that, it's, third-party data is becoming less and less reliable.
Yeah.
And so talk to us about that, because we know as a CDP, you're concentrating, and your customers are primarily using first-party data. But I'd be interested in hearing the conversation that you have with people about third-party data, because I know that people are using platforms like yours and others to connect with other third-party enrichment platforms. And so tell me a little bit about the conversations you have with customers when you're talking to them about them bringing third-party data into the platform.
Yeah. So to be perfectly frank, I challenge them not to always. I've had many conversations, particularly with sort of historically direct mail oriented types of retailers and manufacturers who say, well, can we bring our third party data into the platform? And from a technical perspective, the answer is yes. From a should you though perspective, I'm not as sold. And so we have that conversation very early where you're going to bring in those third party attributes, want to do an append. All of that is really just being judicious about whether or not there's a genuine need there. Is the lift that you're going to get from that data append considerable enough to be worth the potential liability that comes along with it should regulations or whatnot change? Should the data be inaccurate, and all the things that we just sort of finished talking about. And also this idea of like for me, and this maybe is a bit of a purist, but you have a chance to kind of start again with a clean first party data asset. Why pollute it with the third party data, particularly again, if kind of the first two requirements aren't satisfied, that it's not going to provide a considerable lift and you may be at more risk as a result of doing it. So, that's kind of my orientation. And as a company, that's the conversation that we have. Of course, again, up to them. It's their asset. We're just processing that data. We don't have any sort of way of saying, decisively, you shouldn't, you can't. But we do try to push toward that outcome, because I think what really is happening right now behind the scenes is, there's some really stressful conversations happening in boardrooms and for marketers, where on the one hand, there's a recognition about all of these things happening, that the cookie's going away, all of these things are going on, but there hasn't yet been a forcing function to give them clarity on what that's going to look like and feel like. And Google kicking the can down the road further is hurting there. Apple went ahead with a lot of their changes in a way that, quite frankly, pissed off a lot of people on the marketing and the brand side, because it was so disruptive. But you could make an argument that, well, at least it was decisive, and then they had to react. It did force some scrambling. And then, of course, you have this total mismatch of different regulations depending on what states you're in and what countries you're in and all of that stuff. And so I think the combination of all of this is resulting in just a huge amount of uncertainty, which is incredibly difficult for businesses to navigate. It's resulting in sort of byproduct of that, a lack of standard playbook or approach to take, which kind of see point one, that level of uncertainty is really scary and risky, because it leaves you exposed as a brand to making the wrong choice and having your competitor make a different one, versus everyone sort of having to play by the same set of rules or path forward. And then the last part of it is that without the genuine understanding of what the implications of this are going to be, let's recall Google's first step when they deprecate the cookie is to start with 1% of traffic, right? Everybody recognizes the enormity of what we're about to do here. And so even if you're testing and doing a lot of that, this is such an integrated, complex ecosystem. Part of the problem with ad tech historically has been it's so black boxed. It's so difficult to know what's going on. Nobody really has a good sense of this. So you can't kind of blame people for being reluctant to move toward an unknown future, given all of these other variability. And I think that for me is frustrating, because while it's the right decision, it's the right move to go forward, as a business leader and the conversations that we have with customers, you totally understand why they're not the one necessarily out in front, charging forth to be at the vanguard of this, because the vanguard keeps moving and we don't really know what's on the other side. And until we start to really crest that collectively, the first step in that will be Google, I think. We really don't know. And I don't think that's good ultimately either for the ends that we're trying to achieve via these means. It's just creating more tumult and making it harder for companies to craft good strategies around first party data and privacy and consent, because everything just keeps moving and it's really, really murky what that should look like and what the changes should be. I mean, if you look as a good example of this, the ruling from the EU last week that, okay, we have an agreement for how US and EU data can be exchanged with each other. We're good to go. Okay, except you're not, because this is the third attempt at this. There's every reason to think that the same group that keeps challenging these rules is going to do so again. And so you're just stuck. We're just stuck in this really challenging place right now. And I think that general kind of malaise is afflicting most of the industry in terms of moving really with pace and confidence toward a better outcome of a more consent-oriented, privacy-first type of marketing world.
Yeah, good points. And I'm going to make it even more complex, because I'm going to throw in AI and say that as an example. And this is where I get to plug, BDEX a little bit, because, what we're doing now is, we're talking to a lot of people about, the same things you've talked about regarding third-party data, pushing people towards first-party data, but first-party data has its limitations. Like you're able to, segment and you're able to target your audience in better ways because of platforms like yours, and that's fantastic. But there's still that limitation in the sense that you're still targeting your existing audience. Mm-hmm. So that's great. You can grow your audience. You can target them better. You can personalize better because it's first party data. But the challenge is, how do I find more customers, right? How do I find new people that are maybe just like my existing customers, or just like my best customers, or my best customers for this product or that product? And so that's where people used third-party data in the past. They were like, okay, well, I want to find people that fit, my target persona, and how do I find that, they created an avatar and said, I want to reach these types of people. That's obviously not necessarily going to be, the path going forward. What we've done is we've built an AI platform that does that for you. So we essentially are modeling your first party data, building that model of your first party data, and then looking at trillions of data sets, signals that are coming in across the ecosystem. These are signals across, the bid stream, across, ad platforms that allow us to sort of find people that are, have similar patterns as your existing customers, and then build an audience off of that and then target them. So I think that's, to us, that's the future, is AI as far as ad targeting and improving ad targeting to reach new consumers that look like, the people that you're trying to reach. And so we think that that's sort of a future replacement for third-party data, where it's like, okay, you have your first-party data, and instead of going to some third-party data platform, you're going to go to some AI platform. And maybe it's one like ours that models based on your existing, or maybe it's another one like Chalice, who, monitors your existing ad campaigns, looks for trends in those ad campaigns, and then finds people that, have those similar trends. There's a lot of different types of AI platforms that I think that are going to be emerging, that are going to be able to do that. So, goodbye third-party data. I think a lot of people are happy to say that. It'll be really interesting to see how new AI platforms similar to ours can go forward and help people improve targeting and improve their reach, essentially.
Yep.
And so that's one thing that we're excited about, and sort of I'll use that to sort of segue into first-party data, because that is really kind of the next topic. And that's something that we've talked about, we talk about on the show a lot, about the importance of companies harnessing their first-party data and understanding, the best sort of mechanisms, best ways to collect that data without it being intrusive. People are often, they want to hold that data close to them. They don't want to share their information. But if we talk about value exchange a lot. If you have the proper value exchange in place, then your customers, if they trust you and know you and they like you, they're going to be more apt to share information with you that will be helpful to you and enable you to improve your segmentation and targeting to them. So talk to us a little bit about, how you talk about first-party data, and obviously, as BlueConic, that's a big part of your business, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's the business for sure. There is no us without first-party data. That's the reason for being, for sure. I think you hit on the general point of this, which is being able to understand who your consumers and customers are, and your shoppers and your readers and whatever industry you're in, better in such a way that you can improve the value exchange that you have with them, whether that is through personalization and sort of the traditional marketing techniques, but also, on the more sophisticated side of things, also recognizing when not to do those. We've gotten case studies over the years recognizing that more is not necessarily more for some customers. The VIPs, their most impressive customers, actually have an inverse reaction to a lot of the marketing programs that they run for lower tier customers, for example. And so it's a lens into how do we run our business in a way that's actually in service of the segments, broadly speaking, that we need to interact with in the best kind of possible ways. And what are the outcomes that we're trying to drive, right? One of the things that is central to what we do, and I mentioned this at the top, is we're the hands-on keyboard users for BlueConic are the folks who are responsible for driving the business. They have a number attached to what they do every day. They're not just analysts who are responsible for reporting, or not just data scientists who are responsible for running the algorithms and sort of generating an output. These are the folks who need the output in order to make good decisions and then activate on those decisions immediately, right? That needs to translate into a different website interaction. It needs to translate into a different email sent or not sent, as the case might be. So it's really looking at the problem of the marketing team, largely speaking, and sort of the similar cohorts in other businesses, not having the access to the data that was once kind of lodged either in an IT, in a big data warehouse, in sort of ERP systems, right? Those kind of technologies that they haven't had any access to, and or that it's been totally segmented and siloed from each other in their email platform versus their campaign tool versus on the website versus in mobile. So marketing has really had that 1-2 punch of not having access, either precluded from having it or it being siloed from them. Bringing it together gives them that sense of, okay, this is actually who I'm engaging with. Whether they're known to me yet, they're still addressable if they're in a certain channel. What are the signals that I can take from what they're doing and interact in intelligent ways in that anonymous capacity, all the way down to, this is someone I have total confidence that I understand who they are. I recognize them across the different channels that they interact with us. What's the best way for me to continue to engage them and draw insight from that? And for us, the way I see this is in a world that is moving toward empowering consumers with the data that they provide, that the consent that they have to offer, your value exchange has to be worth it. I'm not convinced that you can quantify a data asset per se. I know some folks have attempted to do that. But I do think that there is a hugely larger onus on brands and companies now to earn that confidence, earn that trust in a way that was not necessarily true 10 years ago, 20 years ago. But if you think about trust as really being the currency that brands have to transact in now, having the right data and using it in the right ways with the consumer's awareness and transparency and consent is going to be a critical part of that. Without that, you can't essentially transact. And I think that's only going to become more true in the next few years. And will get hotter and faster as we move toward that, even though we've seen in the last few years, 5 years since GDPR, et cetera, this is getting faster and hotter kind of every year.
Yeah, it sure is, for sure. And I think that, you made a good point, and it's true. And we said it here before. It's like you have to earn the consumer's trust, and it comes down to that brand and their relationship with the consumer.
For sure.
So how do we balance that, letting the consumer know that their privacy is paramount, while also going into, we always talk about hyper personalization, whether it's in marketing, whether it's in sales, whether, all the way down to the cold calls and the product design. But so how do we balance that, letting the customer know that your privacy is so very important to us, but we also need to utilize it so that we have, this hyper personalization?
Yeah, I mean, it's varies by company, by industry, and another number of other variables. Adam Cahill, who has done some great work with our team actually on building out a marketing data ethics framework to help diagnose exactly what you're describing, because a lot of companies simply aren't ready to even make that commitment in terms of their own governance structures, their processes, their systems, really aren't ready, to be honest, to step up and say, we really respect your privacy, or rather they can say it, but there's not a lot of meat on that bone. And so the part of the why we created that framework in the first place actually was to sort of get alignment internally on how good is your foundation, what is your philosophy as a company, what is your risk exposure if you don't get this right, really exploring this from all the different facets and coming up with sort of the roadmap for where you as a company are in getting to the place, Josh, where you can say that and recognize the impact of it. I think a mark of a mature company in this space is one who has calibrated what is the right amount of data, both collecting it in the first place, how long it persists, how it's being used. These are all things that have been rigorously assessed, kind of audited, and are checked on an ongoing basis. I think very few companies, quite frankly, are there. There's the ones who by necessity have, financial services and healthcare and some of these others. But even then, I think there's still a higher bar that as an industry we need to get to. But you can see great examples of companies where they're very transparent in their messaging. They sort of explain why they are collecting the data that they're collecting. And we have a number of customers actually who have just used the platform to test the different messaging around their consent management and found that when they are transparent and they're clear about what they're doing, not just these vague platitudes about, we use cookies to improve your site experience or some garbage that everybody uses and just makes the internet noisy, that they get much higher opt-in rates and they get higher consent, which does two things. One, it engenders trust with the consumer, obviously, but also results in you having better data. So I think there's really a lot of wins here. It goes back to the point I made a few minutes ago about the challenge of being in the Wild West is that there isn't a playbook, there isn't clarity here. And a lot of companies just don't have the wherewithal, they don't have the resources to do some of that testing and do some of that analysis, but the tools are there to do it. And there's pretty good evidence actually that when done right, it's less of a balance to strike and more of a pretty clear path forward, but it's still nascent and unfamiliar to most. And they're sort of not embarking on it just yet to figure out what that right kind of mix is for their company.
I think that's great that you're helping your clients, sort of challenging them by asking them, what is their sort of data policies and what do they look like? And sort of giving them that guidance, because I think that, we had a conversation just a couple of weeks ago with Bob Audette from Guidehouse about data stewardship and how important it is, especially the larger the company and these brands that are holding a lot of data and then it's coming from so many different places, right? How important it is to have somebody that's inside, it's sort of the data steward, it is in charge of, okay, where is this data coming from? Where are we holding it? And putting those policies in place. And even what he was saying is it doesn't matter how big a company you are. Obviously, the bigger the company you are, the more important that is that
sure.
Yes. But even if you're a small company, you don't necessarily have to have, a full-time person doing this. You can assign someone or two people to, whose job is to oversee your data policies relating to, marketing data or product data or whatever it is, so that you actually can, manage that data properly and sort of enlist the trust of your customers so that you can tell them, look, these are the things that we're collecting and this is how we're going to secure it. And these are the reasons why we're using that data, and know that we are, taking care of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's important. And it's a conversation we had a couple of weeks ago, and it just sort of fortifies everything that you're saying as well. And so I think that's super important. And, going back to the whole collecting of first party data, it all goes back to that trust. And so you have to have a way to earn that trust. And in doing that, having that transparency, it enables you to do that. And like you said, improves, ultimately will end up improving your rate of reaction, or interaction with your customers and your opt-in rates and things like that. So that's great. It's awesome to see that you guys are doing that. We're running out of time. So before we go, I think that, there's one question we always like to ask everybody. And that is about your tech stack. I think that everybody's always interested in hearing, what kind of tools people are using. Is it Slack? What kind of email program are you using? Or, what do you use to manage your sort of day to day?
Yeah.
We're all pretty busy people. And as the CEO of a company like BlueConic, I think it's important for people to learn from you. And so if you could share what you would say some of your favorite products in your tech stack.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we obviously run our own software and our marketing technology as well.
Yeah.
So we literally call it dog food because we eat our own dog food, among any number of other kind of key tools. We, as a business, since I'm sort of more on that side of it now, we're actually going through this big discussion right now of we use a lot of different tools from a lot of different companies, and we've gotten big enough where we've got, the team Google folks, the team Microsoft folks, the team Slack folks, the team Zoom people. And we're finding sort of that redundancy is definitely like, partially it's the money of that, but also it's harder than to collaborate as everyone uses their own favorite thing. So it's something top of mind for me to figure out for next year. Who's going to lose their favorite tools and who gets to keep theirs, because we need to be more streamlined and consistent. I love these kind of small, irritating, but good growth problems to have. And then me personally, the technology I could not live without actually is called a Remarkable. It's like a Kindle, but a notebook. And it has a mobile app and a desktop app, and it syncs to the cloud, but it's all handwritten notes in a very lightweight kind of Kindle type of format. And that is actually the technology that keeps me as the CEO functioning, is using my Remarkable. My whole life is in it. I don't know what I would do without it. That's my primary tech.
Very cool. Is that one of those where you write on it and it converts it to text?
You can convert it to text. You can keep it in handwriting. You send it to PDFs. You can do all kinds of things with it. It's amazing.
Yeah.
What's it called again?
The Remarkable.
That sounds super cool.
It's super cool.
Sounds remarkable.
It is truly. That is truly it. I can't say enough about it.
Very cool.
Well,
you want to close
Cory,
this out?
where can people find you?
In fewer places than you used to be able to, Josh. I have really culled my social media over the years, but you can certainly find me on LinkedIn. I'm Cory Munchbach at LinkedIn. And of course, Cory at BlueConic.com or on our website. Those are the places that you will find me most commonly.
Fantastic. Well, Cory, we really appreciate you spending some time with us and sharing all this knowledge and wisdom. It's been like fantastic. And David, it was great to see you. And audience members, we hope that you will check out BDEX's Omni IQ. All you got to do is go to BDEX.com. You can click to try for free, or use the QR code on the screen to create your account. You can find all that information. If you need further information, you can find it at info@bdex.com. David, you have any parting words for us?
No, that's it. Thank you so much, Josh, for guest hosting with me. And Cory, this has been what a great conversation. I really appreciate you joining us on the show today, and would love to chat with you offline. Maybe there's an opportunity for our companies to do some business together,
Sounds awesome. Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right.